The voice on the training field still haunted her after all these years. Speed, altitude, surprise. That's how you take a fight no one thinks you can win, and make it yours. Commander Elena Kane stood at the far end of the hangar, the muted echo of tools clanging against metal filling the air. Her red hair was pulled back into a regulation bun, but there was no mistaking the streak of rebellion in the way she carried herself. Green eyes, steady as gun sights, scanned the Apache gunship. She would fly into another mission before sunrise. To most, she was just another attack helicopter pilot, competent, decorated, reliable. To those who had flown with her, she was Valkyrie. She had logged over 3,000 combat flight hours, many of them in airspace, where the enemy's trigger finger twitched faster than most could think. She had flown for the 127th Air Assault Battalion for years, executing missions that didn't make it into official reports. Yet, her story didn't begin in a war zone. It began on the cracked asphalt of a rural airfield, under the watchful eyes of a man who believed helicopters could rewrite the rules of air combat. That man was her father, Major Daniel Kane. Daniel Kane was the kind of soldier whose ideas made some people uncomfortable. Where others saw helicopters as slow, vulnerable support craft, he saw potential predators. He had a theory, one that the higher brass politely dismissed as impractical. If piloted with the right mindset, a helicopter could stand its ground, even against fixed-wing fighters. He didn't just tell Elena this. He trained it into her bones. Most kids spent weekends at malls or movie theaters. Elena spent hers gripping the controls of an old training chopper, feeling the shudder of the rotors through her arms as her father barked instructions over the intercom. They would lift off, skimming treetops, weaving through valleys, or freezing behind ridgelines to hide from imaginary radar. She learned about terrain masking before she could drive a car, slipping the aircraft's profile behind the land so that an enemy's sensors would think she'd vanished. Her father's lessons weren't just about flying. They were about thinking like the enemy. Fighter pilots, he'd tell her, leaning over the kitchen table where dog-eared aviation manuals were spread like a battle plan, are trained to see the battlefield in a certain way. They look for patterns. We break those patterns. You take their training, their greatest strength, and turn it into a weakness. He'd quiz her over grainy combat footage, pausing the video mid-maneuver. Where's his blind spot? Where's his momentum taking him? If you were in that sky, where would you strike? As a teenager, Elena could already predict how a jet pilot would react in the first 5 seconds of contact. She didn't yet know it, but those instincts would one day save her life, and the lives of others. When she earned her commission after graduating with honors in aerospace engineering, her instructors were already whispering about her unorthodox approach. Most cadets obsessed over their own helicopters' weapon systems. Elena spent her spare hours studying the radar range of foreign fighters, the turning radius of interceptors, and the lock-on times of air-to-air missiles. One instructor asked her bluntly, "Why are you wasting time learning fighter tactics? You're not in the Air Force." She had only smiled and replied, "You never know when you'll need to use someone else's playbook against them." Her official record was exceptional, nearly perfect test scores, rapid skill progression, but her unofficial training was where her edge truly formed. She pushed flight simulators far beyond the scenarios given, experimenting with maneuvers Apache pilots weren't supposed to attempt. High-speed reversals, steep climbing engagements, snap rolls to evade heat seekers. The instructors told her such moves were dangerous. She agreed and practiced them anyway. By the time she deployed for her first combat tour, she wasn't just another rotor pilot waiting for an escort. She was a tactician in her own right, carrying the voice of her father in her head every time she strapped into the cockpit. Her call sign, Valkyrie, came during a chaotic rescue mission on that first tour. A Marine convoy had been ambushed in a canyon, pinned down by enemy armor and infantry. Elena dove into the kill zone without hesitation, using the walls of the canyon to mask her approach before unleashing a storm of fire that silenced the threat. She didn't just destroy the armor. She hunted and eliminated 2 hostile helicopters in the same engagement. After that, pilots started talking. "Valkyrie doesn't just fly an Apache." One Air Force pilot would later write in a mission debrief. "She stalks with it, like a hawk in the clouds." It wasn't long before word of her unconventional style began spreading beyond her unit. Some saw her as reckless. Others recognized a rare kind of innovation, one that could shift the balance in the right hands. She never sought the attention, but she understood why it came. Every victory reinforced a lesson she had learned as a girl on that cracked airstrip. The greatest weapon you have is the enemy's expectation that you'll do exactly what they predict. And then, one mission would come along to test that lesson to its absolute limit. It would begin with a distress call from a 6-man Special Forces team, trapped deep inside hostile territory. It would involve a sky swarming with fighter jets that should have made her turn tail for home. It would force her to gamble everything: her aircraft, her crew, her life, on tactics no helicopter pilot was supposed to attempt. The day she earned her place in military history began with a single decision. She would not abandon those soldiers. The briefing room smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee gone stale. Outside, the desert wind howled across the airstrip, rattling the loose metal siding of the hangar. Commander Elena Valkyrie, Kane stood over the flickering tactical display, her arms folded, eyes locked on the blinking red icons that marked the trouble. 6 green markers, Allied Special Forces, sat stranded in the middle of a rugged canyon network, hemmed in by red blips closing in from all directions. The mission commander, Colonel Briggs, stabbed a finger at the display. Team Phantom 6 was gathering intel on weapons trafficking routes. They were compromised when a local asset sold them out. They've got 2 wounded, minimal cover, and hostile forces pressing in fast. Closest air support is 20 minutes out. That's too long. You're in the area, Kane. Get there, hold the enemy back, and stay low until the fighters arrive. She studied the terrain, already calculating. Low won't keep them alive if air cover shows up for the other side first. Briggs hesitated. Satellite confirms hostile fast movers are airborne, could be interceptors or strike aircraft. This isn't a fight for an Apache, Commander. If those jets reach you before backup does, you're outmatched. The implication hung in the air. Retreat. Elena's jaw tightened. She could still hear her father's voice from years ago, the lesson drilled into her during those weekend flights. A battle isn't won by avoiding what you fear. It's won by making the enemy fear you instead. Sir, she said evenly, you've got 6 operators on the ground who'll be dead in 15 minutes. I'm not waiting 20 for help. Briggs exhaled through his nose. Your call, Valkyrie. But if those enemy jets get on you, they'll have the fight they never trained for. Minutes later, her Apache roared skyward, kicking dust devils across the tarmac. The world below fell away, a patchwork of dunes, broken ridges, and jagged canyons. Her weapons load was standard for close support: 16 Hellfires, a 30mm chain gun, and 4 Stinger air-to-air missiles, a token inclusion that most Apache pilots carried but almost never used. She, however, had trained with them as though her life depended on it. As she neared the canyon where Phantom 6 was pinned, the radio chatter grew frantic. Valkyrie, we're down to last mags. They're pushing from the east ridge. 2 down, holding on the west wall. She skimmed the canyon rim, nose down, scanning for muzzle flashes. Below, enemy fighters, not aircraft, but infantry, darted between rocks, trying to close the trap. Her first salvo of Hellfires hit hard, turning the east approach into a smoking ruin. The 30mm spat a chain of thunder down into the valley, buying the team precious seconds. But then her radar lit up. 6 contacts. High speed. High altitude. 2 formations of 3, sweeping in from the north. Not gunships. Not drones. Jets. She tapped her display, reading the returns. 4th-generation interceptors, deadly in a straight fight. They were descending fast. Valkyrie, Overlord. Multiple enemy fighters inbound. Break off an RTB now. Her eyes flicked from the radar to the team pinned below. She could see their heat signatures huddled against the canyon wall, boxed in on 3 sides. 20 minutes for help meant 20 minutes they didn't have. Negative, Overlord, she replied. Not leaving them. Keep your birds inbound. I'll clear the airspace. There was a pause on the line. Kane, you're an Apache pilot. You can't dogfight with jets. A thin smile curved her lips. That's what they think. The enemy was coming in perfect textbook formation, just as her father had described years ago. Confident, predictable, looking for a slow, low target to swat aside. She climbed, not to escape, but to confuse them. 8,000 feet, where no Apache had any business being in hostile airspace. The move alone would make them wonder what she was doing. Her fingers danced over the controls, adjusting pitch and yaw, tucking herself just behind a jagged ridgeline that masked her infrared signature. Through the Apache's sensors, she watched them approach, sleek hunters closing in on what they thought was easy prey. The lead pilot's voice crackled over an open channel. One attack helicopter in Sector 4. Shouldn't take long, boys. Elena keyed her mic on the same frequency, her tone calm, almost casual. Gentlemen, you picked the wrong day. The first jet screamed in low, straight toward her position. His plan was obvious. A high-speed gun run, too fast for her to track or respond. What he didn't know was that she was already tracking him, calculating his line, timing her pop-up. At the last moment, she rose from behind the ridge, crosshairs locked. Two Hellfires streaked out, their trails bright against the blue. Impact. The fighter blossomed into fire and fragments before his wingman could even react. Lead is down. How? She didn't stay to answer. Dropping back behind the ridge, she rolled left, scanning for her next move. The remaining 5 jets spread out, breaking their tight formation. Confusion was already setting in. They'd expected her to run. Instead, she'd drawn first blood. Below, Phantom 6 was silent for a moment, their firefight briefly drowned by the distant roar of engines. Then a voice crackled over her comms. Valkyrie was that. Keep your heads down, she told them. I'm just getting started. High above, 2 enemy jets began a pincer approach, a move designed to box her in from opposite sides. She could almost see her father smirk in her mind's eye. They'll try to trap you. Let them think they have. Her heart rate barely changed as she prepared to spring the trap herself. The 2 interceptors swept in from opposite bearings, sleek predators, slicing through the thin air above the canyon. From their altitude advantage, they should have owned the fight. Every manual said so. Every training program reinforced it. Elena Kane knew exactly how those pilots were thinking. She'd studied that mindset her entire life. Make them think they have the advantage, then take it away. The moment they committed to their pincer approach, she dove hard, rotors thundering, slipping into the shadow of the canyon wall. Their sensors lost her instantly, her heat signature blending with the rock face. In their cockpits, they would be scanning frantically, expecting her to pop up low and try to run. She did pop up, but not low. A sharp pull on the cyclic, and the Apache clawed skyward at a steep angle, momentum forcing her stomach toward her spine. The first fighter flashed overhead, missing his pass entirely. As his wingman adjusted to cover, Elena's targeting system locked onto the perfect opportunity. A Stinger missile roared from its rail, streaking up into the afterburning exhaust of the lead jet. The explosion was sudden and absolute, a fireball shedding debris that spiraled toward the valley below. The second fighter yanked hard into an evasive climb, a maneuver that put him exactly where she wanted him. She had already calculated his escape vector during his approach. When he turned, she was there, crosshairs waiting. Another Stinger leapt skyward, detonating against his fuselage. 2 more down, she reported into her secure channel, her voice even, almost bored. The enemy frequency erupted in frantic chatter. How is this possible? It's a helicopter. She keyed into their channel again, letting a dry chuckle carry over the static. Seems no one told me that. Up above, 3 interceptors remained, and they were no longer hunters. Their formation dissolved into defensive, reactive flight. They were trying to figure her out, but the problem was one they had never trained for. One of them tried a high-speed pass from her 6 o'clock, racing in faster than sound could keep up. His plan was standard: make a single-firing run and use speed to escape her weapon range. But speed was nothing against an opponent who refused to play by your rules. Elena swung the Apache in a tight, almost unnatural reversal, the kind no textbook recommended, the kind that could tear apart less expertly handled machinery. 1 heartbeat later, She was nose to nose with the incoming jet. The 30mm chain gun thundered, each round a molten hammer punching through cockpit glass and engine housing. At that range, the fighter didn't disintegrate so much as come apart. "3 down," she said over her own comms, scanning for the next target. The last two broke hard in opposite directions, desperate to open distance. One climbed for altitude, the other dove low to try and flank her from below the radar horizon. She went after the climber first. From high above, he launched a long-range missile, a weapon meant to kill her long before she could return fire. The missile's smoke trail slashed across the sky, but Elena had studied engagement envelopes until she could recite them in her sleep. She dropped altitude fast, ducking behind a rock spine, chaff flares spilling into the wind. The missile passed harmlessly into the canyon wall, exploding in a shower of dust and stone. That same rock spine masked her return shot, a hellfire fired from maximum range. The fighter pilot never saw it coming. When it hit, his aircraft spun into a cartwheel of debris before vanishing behind the ridgeline. "For down," she announced. The last pilot's breathing was audible over the open channel. He wasn't hunting anymore. He was surviving. "You can run," she told him in a voice that was calm and cold. "Or you can join the others. Your choice." His answer came in the form of a retreating radar signature, accelerating toward friendly airspace. She let him go. Chasing him wasn't the mission. She dipped her nose and banked hard back, toward the canyon floor. Below, Phantom 6 was still trading fire, with ground forces pressing from the north. With the sky clear, she poured precise bursts of 30mm fire into the enemy positions, each impact erupting in dust and flame. Through the crackle of comms, the ground team leader's voice came in, tinged with awe. "Valkyrie, what you just did up there, I've never seen anything like it." She didn't answer. Her focus was on keeping her rotor blades and her team alive until extraction. Overlord's voice returned at last, no longer ordering her to break contact. "Valkyrie, confirm airspace secure?" "5 enemy fighters neutralized," she replied. One fled, proceeding with close support. Her father's voice echoed in her head again. "Never let them fight the battle they trained for. Make them fight the one they can't understand." Today, she had done exactly that. And the day wasn't over yet. The air smelled of dust, smoke, and cordite as Elena brought the Apache screaming down into the canyon's throat. The rotors whipped the air into violent currents, scattering loose debris across the ridgeline. Phantom 6 was still alive barely. Their position was a jagged cluster of boulders near the canyon wall, hemmed in by enemy fighters in mismatched uniforms. Her cannon chattered, shredding an enemy heavy machine gun that had been chewing chunks out of the rock cover the special forces were hiding behind. The burst was precise, 3 short squeezes on the trigger, then an immediate shift to a new firing line. Every movement was deliberate, no wasted shots, no hesitation. "Valkyrie, North Ridge is still hot." She banked hard left, banking low enough that her rotor tips felt like they were brushing the cliff face. A burst of 30mm fire carved through a squad, trying to climb into a flanking position. Smoke billowed, dust plumes rising like storm clouds. The radio crackled again. "We've got to move now, Kane. Ammo's down to nothing." She scanned the terrain, mind running faster than the Apache's targeting computer. The canyon mouth to the west was still blocked, too much enemy armor entrenched there. The only viable escape route was east, through a narrower corridor that twisted like a snake, full of choke points. It was risky, which meant it was perfect. "Phantom 6, get ready to move east. I'll clear the way." Her thumb danced across the weapon selector. For Hellfire's armed. She climbed, just enough to peek over the ridgeline without fully exposing herself. The targeting reticle flashed red over 2 enemy armored vehicles, likely command elements coordinating the ground assault. 2 quick trigger pulls. 2 streaks of fire. The explosions hit like twin thunderclaps, tearing through the armor and scattering their crews. Without their command nodes, the assault force's coordination would crumble. The corridor was still dangerous, but now it was fractured, disorganized. "Move," she barked. "I'll keep the wolves off you." The 6 operators broke from cover, their dark silhouettes darting between rocks. Enemy rifles snapped and cracked in the distance, but her cannon kept them pinned. Each shot an iron curtain between the team and the enemy. Halfway through the corridor, a burst of tracer fire arced in from above. Not ground fire, something faster, cleaner. Her threat display flared red. Hostile air contact. She didn't even curse, just gritted her teeth and yanked the cyclic. A single enemy jet had returned, the one that fled. He was coming in low this time, determined to salvage some honor by making her his kill. "You really should have stayed gone," she muttered. He fired first. A cannon burst that cut through the canyon air like ripping fabric. She banked hard, skimming so close to the rock wall that pebbles clattered against her canopy. His rounds missed by meters. Her climb was brutal, vertical, and far faster than a helicopter should attempt in that tight a space. She could almost feel the air screaming around the rotor blades. At the top of the climb, she twisted into a nose-down dive, the jet now framed perfectly in her sights as he banked for another pass. The Hellfire smoke trail was short, the range was nearly point-blank. The impact turned his fuselage into a tumbling torch that slammed into the canyon floor. "6 down," she said into the mic. Not for effect, just so the ground team would know the sky was theirs. Phantom 6 Leader's voice was raw with adrenaline. "We're clear, heading to your mark." She pivoted ahead of them, blasting through the last resistance at the canyon's far end. Enemy troops scattered like ants from a kicked nest, their firing lines collapsing under the relentless hammering of her chain gun. When the team reached the extraction zone, the rumble of inbound friendly transports filled the air. She circled overhead, scanning for threats until the last operator was aboard. Only then did she exhale, a long, measured breath that she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the first radar contact. "Overlord, Phantom 6 secure. Airspace clear." There was a long pause on the other end. "Valkyrie, did you just take out 6 fighters?" "5 destroyed," she corrected. "1 returned late. He didn't last." Briggs's voice came through, quieter now. "Copy that. RTB. And hell of a job, Kane." She glanced back toward the canyon, the smoke still curling into the sky. Her father's words surfaced again, as they always did after a fight. "Don't measure yourself by what others think is possible. Today the rules had bent. Tomorrow they might break entirely." And she was fine with that. By the time Elena Kane's Apache touched down on the tarmac, the sun had sunk low enough to paint the airfield in shades of copper and shadow. The rotor slowed with a groaning whine, each revolution shedding the adrenaline from her muscles in slow increments. She powered down the systems, the canopy glass reflecting her own tired face, flushed from heat, eyes still bright with the charge of combat. When the cockpit finally opened, she was met with something she hadn't expected. The entire flight line was waiting for her. Pilots from every squadron stood in loose clusters, fighter jocks in their flight suits, transport crews, mechanics still smelling of oil and jet fuel. Their conversations had died down into a low murmur. They weren't here for ceremony. They were here to see. Colonel Briggs stepped forward first, his hands clasped behind his back. The man was not easily impressed, but today there was something different in his expression. Curiosity mixed with the kind of grudging respect soldiers reserved for those who had just rewritten the rules. "Kane," he began, "what you accomplished today shouldn't have been possible." She slid her helmet under one arm. "With respect, sir, it's only impossible if you believe the rulebook is carved in stone." Before Briggs could reply, another voice cut in. Captain Juno Reyes, an F-35 pilot who had more than 200 combat sorties to her name, shook her head in disbelief. "I've been in the air for 12 years, Kane, and I've never seen a helicopter take a fighter head-on and walk away. You didn't just survive out there. You hunted them." Elena didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply reached into her flight suit pocket and pulled out a small, worn photo of her father. "I was taught a long time ago that the most dangerous opponent isn't the fastest or the strongest. It's the one you never saw coming." Word of her mission spread faster than official channels could keep up. Within hours, intelligence officers were debriefing her in a closed room, sketching diagrams, replaying combat footage frame by frame. Every maneuver she'd made was studied like a puzzle, each decision dissected. They wanted to know how she'd managed to defeat aircraft that, on paper, should have been untouchable. The after-action report was stamped classified within minutes of completion. High-level tacticians across multiple branches were already requesting access. The unspoken reality was clear. What she'd done in that canyon wasn't just a victory. It was a shift in thinking. 2 weeks later, Briggs called her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, the desk bare except for a manila folder with her name printed across the top in bold letters. "You're being reassigned," he told her, sliding the folder toward her. She scanned the first page. It wasn't a demotion. It wasn't even a lateral move. It was an invitation. The assignment was to a program so classified its name wasn't written anywhere in the orders, a newly formed experimental aviation unit tasked with rewriting helicopter air combat doctrine from the ground up. And they wanted her to lead it. "This is about more than one battle," Briggs continued. "You proved something the rest of us didn't think could be done. Now the Army wants you to teach it, to pass on what you know before someone decides to bury it in a file marked too risky." She looked up from the orders. "So, you want me to turn more helicopter pilots into fighter killers?" Briggs's mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. "I want you to make sure that the next time someone says impossible, we have people ready to prove them wrong." 6 months later, Elena Kane, now promoted to major, stood on the tarmac of a remote training facility, watching a line of fresh pilots climb into their own Apaches. She had written the syllabus herself: advanced air-to-air tactics, terrain exploitation, counter-missile maneuvers, psychological warfare in the cockpit. "Think like a fighter pilot," she told them during their first briefing, "but fight like a helicopter. Use what they think are your weaknesses, speed, altitude, size, and turn them into advantages. Make them chase you where you want them to be. And when they think they've got you, flip the sky inside out." Her methods weren't gentle. The training flights were grueling, and her students quickly learned that mistakes in her scenarios could mean simulated death within seconds. But they also learned something else, that the battlefield is never as fixed as the manuals pretend. Every so often, she would catch one of them glancing at her with a mix of awe and disbelief, no doubt imagining her in that canyon, dancing between stone walls and steel predators. She never told them the full story in class. She didn't need to. The lesson wasn't about what she had done. It was about why she had dared to do it. Late one evening, after a long day of training flights, she stood alone on the control tower balcony, the desert wind tugging at her hair. In the distance, the horizon bled into the night, the stars beginning to prick through the darkness. She thought of Phantom 6, alive because she hadn't turned back. She thought of the pilots she'd faced, confident until the moment they realized the rules didn't protect them anymore. Her father's voice came to her again, as clear as if he were standing beside her. "Sometimes, the fight isn't about winning. It's about changing the way the game is played forever." Major Elena Valkyrie, Kane smiled to herself. She had changed the game, and now she was teaching others to do the same. Somewhere in some future battle, a helicopter pilot would face down the impossible and win, because they'd learned not to believe in impossible in the first place.